Hey, what is going on everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and we're back over at the Xbox 360 here, and you could see this is going to be a bad update related video, but this is actually going to be a pretty good, pretty great, and pretty awesome update for, well, bad update. For those who do not know, bad update is a software-only hypervisor exploit for the Xbox 360, which I have been covering. It currently works up to the latest dashboard at the time of recording this, which is 17559, and in short, this allows you, as long as you have a USB drive and a working console, to run unsigned code. That means homebrew, custom applications, game mods, emulators, what you're wanting to on a JTAG or RGH. A lot of that you can actually do now on a Xbox 360 using only a USB drive, not having to open it up, not touch a soldering iron, nothing like that. And it's been pretty good for the most part. It does have its issues with reliability here because it can take several times to boot up, but I have covered that in depth not only in several previous videos, but also Mod Chat episode 131 if you're wanting more of a rundown on that. Now previously, what I had shown was FreeMyXe or FreeMyXe from Invoxy Play Games. And this here is, as it states here, a executable designed to apply freedom unlocking patches based on XE build to the kernel and hypervisor, where essentially once you combine this with bad update, you're able to make more use of the system as opposed to just using bad update alone. So this has made things much more accessible and easier to utilize. However, as everything progresses forward, we now have a new application and payload, I suppose you can say, on the block here, which is XeUnshackle, which ends up still combining what we have from FreeMyXe, but it allows for even more on here. And it states that XeUnshackle or Xenon Unshackle is a custom Xbox 360 app designed to be used with the Xbox 360 bad update exploit. It applies a set of hypervisor kernel patches and loads the DashLaunch system module launch.ine. So this does allow for one of the big things is plugin loading. So if you have custom plugins, additional plugins you want to load in, you now have actual plugin support on bad update thanks to Xenon Unshackle. Now they do state here a few things stating that this is released as is and you're responsible for what you choose to load and any negative effects that could come from this. And again, this is not a soft mod or a permanent soft mod. They do also caution you to back up your NAND, do not flash modified NAND images, do not replace files in the flash, avoid using homebrew or plugins that make changes to the flash, and of course read the readme-important text if you're going to be using anything related to stealth servers on here. So this is all to say here, if you're still using FreeMyXe, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that and it still works quite well. However, this does combine the functionality of FreeMyXe and adds some additional features, and as it states, it applies a full, complete patch set of both hypervisor and kernel patches. These are the exact same patches that are usually applied when building a modified NAND image using XE build for RGH or JTAG systems. It also has support for both retail and dev kit signed XEX files. It does load a slightly modified version of the launch.executable, which is DashLaunch here, because we cannot store this within the NAND itself. So essentially we're able to still load our plugins, but it's all going to be on our storage devices as opposed to installing anything to the NAND. However, the big thing that Byram90, the author of this, has brought to the table is DashLaunch plugin loading, which I will be showing you how to set up plugins on there. So once you have this up and running, it's going to operate a lot closer to something like a JTAG or a RGH system, which is great for anybody who is only using bad update. Now, in order to set this up, it's going to be pretty similar to FreeMyXe, and I'm actually going to roll on the assumption here that you might have FreeMyXe already set up, which if you need to switch over to Xenon Unshackle, it's pretty easy to do here. So you are going to need a few things. First of all, you will need, of course, your Xbox 360, which is on the compatible dashboard and is ready to roll with bad update on it. You're also going to need your USB flash drive, which has bad update, and you're going to need a computer or some way of getting files to and from the USB drive, and a way to, of course, edit a text file. Now, one big thing to keep in mind is, much like FreeMyXe, if you're using Xenon Unshackle, since it essentially has DashLaunch built into it, it does have Xbox Live blocking abilities. So currently you could see this system is offline, and I'll just give you a quick rundown of that. If you go over to your system settings, go over to network settings, within here, I do recommend not keeping your system online. However, if you're wanting to connect your system to your network in order to download things from the Aurora Homebrew store, or even download Aurora cover art, do things like that, it is going to be recommended to connect to your network after you have run bad update with Xenon Unshackle. But before that, you're going to want to stay disconnected from your network. So in this example here, I currently use a Ethernet cable, and that's going to be the easiest way to do it. But before you boot up bad update, you're going to want to disconnect your system from the internet. If it has an Ethernet cable, unplug it. If you're using Wi-Fi, you're going to want to forget your Wi-Fi network and disconnect from it on your system. And then once we run Xenon Unshackle successfully, we can then reconnect to our network. So just keep that in mind. With that bit about the network out of the way, what I'm going to do is go here, I'm going to sign out of this profile, and then I'm going to unplug the USB drive this is on and take it over to my computer so we can work on, well, unshackling our system. I'm going to have this linked down below in the description, but you're going to want to go to the GitHub repository for Xenon Unshackle. If you haven't looked at this yet, I would recommend giving this a good read because there's a bunch of great information here. On top of that, you can now go to the releases section once you're ready to download this, check out any changes that might have been in the latest release that you're grabbing, and then find the latest release, find the zip file, and save it somewhere you can easily find it. Once you have it downloaded, find your XeUnshackle zip file, and then you can right click it and go ahead and extract it out here. With the folder extracted out, we can now go in and delete the archive since we're not going to need that. And now open up your Xenon Unshackle folder. And you're going to see this will look a little bit different than other downloads you might have seen before, but it's not all too difficult to run through. The first thing we should do is open up this README important because, well, this is pretty important. This will contain a lot of notes for the setup instructions, the usage instructions, and even stealth server instructions as well too, along with some recommended applications. Now, I'm not going to be covering anything related to stealth servers on here. However, this is still something I do recommend just spend a couple minutes reading through. And once that is understood, we can close out of here and we're just going to need the rest of the files here. Now, in order to copy these out, we just need to highlight everything, and the only file we do not need is the README important text, since we don't need this on our actual USB drive, but you'll need everything else here. You can go ahead, right click this and copy it out. Now navigate over to wherever you have your USB drive plugged in. Mine is right here, and within the root of your USB drive, you're going to want to right click and paste. You should be given a prompt to overwrite your default executable, to which you're going to want to say yes. So overwrite any files that might be there. So at this point, you should now have your JRPC2, XPDM, launch.ini, and then within bad update payload, you're now going to have that new default executable. And for what it's worth, if you have a zel2f.bin file here, you can either delete this or keep it there. It doesn't really matter. This is more going to be for use with FreeMyXe, so it's going to be up to you if you want to get rid of that or not. I'm just going to keep it there, just in case. However, that's all there is to Xenon Unshackle. We've installed it. That's all we need to do. Well, not quite. It is set up as a base installation, but now we need to modify this launch.ini file. And this is where a lot of our magic is going to happen with plugin support, which is what many people have been wanting. So in order to edit this here, you can go ahead and double click it, and you can use something such as Notepad to run through this, read through the instructions, and set this up. Now this is going to look really daunting, but it's really not too difficult. However, one way to make it a little bit more readable and easier is we can close out of this, and I'm going to have this program linked in the description, but I'd recommend using something such as Notepad++ in order to make this more readable. And this here is what I mean in terms of readability. You can see here that it is nice and color-coded, so we see which ones are the comments and where our actual setup is going to be. And you can see for any of these values here, if you have any questions, each of these, every single line has been annotated by multiple comments. So this is pretty fleshed out if you just scroll down and give it a read. And if you're interested or wondering what any of these do, just read the accompanying comments. One of these is ping patch is enabled, for example, so it states if true, ping limit will be removed for system link play, which now means you can use a LAN tunneling service such as Link or even Xlink Kai as long as this has been enabled. Another one here is live block. For example, this one is set to true, and it states this will block the console from resolving live related DNS, which means once we run this, we'll be able to connect to our network and we'll be blocked from Xbox Live, so we're safe from a ban in that regard, but we can still connect to our network and connect to Aurora services, for example. However, you all are probably wondering how to set up your plugins on here, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing. So you could see here at the top, I do recommend reading this here. This is going to be your guide showing what path you're going to need to point to depending on your storage device. Now, I'm going to personally keep everything on my USB drive, but one of them, for example, if you want to add plugins manually, you can scroll down to the plugins section right here, and you can see that we already have a couple plugins for XPDM as well as JRPC2. These two will enable you to use things such as Xbox 360 Neighborhood, and you'll also be able to use some real-time modding tools if you want to connect your system to your PC and then peek and poke values to your game if you're modding like Call of Duty, for example. I personally don't do that, so I'm not going to be running through it here, but these ones are set up by default for that. However, if we want to add a new plugin, let's go ahead and pop one into plugin 2. For this example, I have a plugin right here called HVP2. I've covered this in a video, which I'll have linked in the description if you want a full rundown of it. But in short, this allows you, while on a retail system, to have some more compatibility to play development builds of games. So if you want to bring over a plugin, you can just copy and paste it over to the root of your USB drive or wherever else you want to put your plugins. You can even make a plugin folder. It really depends on you. But I'm just going to put this with the rest of my plugins here. So since it's in the root, it's called hvp2.xex. What I'm going to do is highlight this completely, right click, copy it out. And if you need to see the full file name, go to View, Show, and enable file name extensions on Windows. Now go back to your launch.ini file, and this is where you want to set your path. Mine, for example, is going to be USB:/, and we can now paste in hvp2.xex. So you can do this with whichever plugin you're wanting to on here. This is just the plugin I'm using, for example. And once that is set, make sure you save it. Now here's another cool thing. If you're using the Aurora dashboard or Freestyle Dash, for example, as your modified dashboard, and you want to have that as your default dashboard, so to speak, much like a RGH system, you can enable that as well. You can come over here and look for the default value. And it states here, default is what loads when you hold no buttons. Leave this blank if you want NXE as default. And by NXE, they mean the default dashboard, like the stock dashboard. And I'm going to show you how this changes as well. So for this, I'm going to set this to Aurora. And for this, we can go back to our USB drive. And if you have Aurora on your USB drive, for example, I know mine is in Games, Aurora, and right here it is default.xex. That is my executable. So we can do the same thing here. Just go ahead and put in the path, which I know mine is going to be USB:/games/Aurora/default.xex. And once you have that punched in, yet again, save. And those are the only two changes I'm personally going to make for this. So like I said, I have these plugins that are going to load in, and now for my default dashboard, it's going to boot into Aurora. And whenever I go to the Xbox home, it'll bring up Aurora. There is a way around that too. I can show you that as well, but let's go ahead and get to our system when we do that. However, once your plugins are tuned to your liking, you can go ahead and close out of here. And probably one last thing to mention, any of those launch.ini settings you change, make sure you're changing it on your USB drive launch.ini. So you can see right here, I'm opening this up, and that is my default, so I know this one has changed. You just don't want to make all these changes to the one on your computer and not make them to your USB drive because, well, we want these changes to be reflected on our Xbox. But with that being said, once we have everything set up to our liking, we can exit out of here, right click, eject our USB drive, and navigate back over to the console. So I've plugged my USB drive back in. Since it is plugged in, I'm going to load up that bad update profile I have. Now I'm going to go down to Recent, Rock Band Blitz, and you all know the deal by now. I'm sure many people have kind of burned this image and the music into their memory at this point if you've been using bad update for any amount of time, but you just need to go through this process here of launching Rock Band Blitz, waiting for it to load in, and then once you get to this screen right here, wait a few seconds, tap the A button, and here we go. Once it says running exploit, all we have to do is wait. If it freezes, we gotta restart and try again. If not, well, that's a pretty lucky race condition. So let's just wait until this boots up. And here we go. Once it ends up booting up, you should see that pretty cool visual as well as a notification that it's dumped your original Mac address. And you should see here, we get to this screen giving you a bit of information. Now it does let you know that patches have been applied, and now regular and JTAG RGH functionality should be possible on your system, which is what makes this really exciting. It also lets you know of your console type, your CPU key, and your DVD key, and we're going to get everything dumped over here. So the first thing I recommend, if you haven't run this before, tap the X button, wait a few seconds, and it should save out a console info.txt file. The next thing we could do is also save that first bootloader key. So you can tap the Y button, and you should get that right there. So once we have that all set, let's wait for that to disappear, and we can now hit the back button on our controller to exit. And check this out. We're going to go to a black screen, and I know mine takes a little bit of time since I have everything on the USB drive, but if we wait a few moments, we should be greeted, here we go, with the Aurora screen. So at this point, we now have this set up. So we can even hit the guide button here, and you could see, check this out, it brought up the Nova plugin, so we do have our temperatures showing, and we should be good at that point. We can now also navigate over to our settings, go into system settings, and say yes. And this here I've also now shown you is how you can exit out to the original dashboard. So you can check this out right here. However, I did not do that simply to show you that command. I also did that because I wanted to share that you can come over to System, go over to your network settings, and at this point, now with XeUnshackle applied, it is safe to connect to your network. So if you're using a wired network, go ahead and plug your system in. If you're using a wireless network, this is where you're going to want to re-add your Wi-Fi network. Just remember to disconnect from your Wi-Fi network before we turn off the system, which is why, as I said before, I'd recommend using a wired network if you can. It's just going to be easier that way since it's physically in the back of the system. Now, once we have that all set up here, this is where that default setting helps out quite a bit. You can now hit the guide button, and you can see here if you tap the Y button for Xbox Home, as opposed to booting back to the standard stock dashboard, it's going to bring us to Aurora. So now we have that available, and it works pretty conveniently because this is pretty similar to how a JTAG or a RGH would work. On top of that, you also do have your plugin support, so if there's any additional plugins you want to load up, you now have that ability. What I am going to do real quick is back up those console sensitive files, so I'm actually going to go back to the system settings here, say yes, it should bring us back out here, and then once we're here, I'm going to sign out real quick and unplug that USB drive. Well, you know, I was going to, but with the way my settings are set here, it booted me back to Aurora. So I'm going to have to do that one more time. Just come back out here and let me go ahead and unplug the USB drive. Now, I do want to show you all this part here because I just want you all to back up your console sensitive files because we do have a few more than before. If you go into your bad update payload folder, you should see some new ones here. One of them is going to be consoleinfo.txt. The other one is going to be original MAC address. And finally, you should also have a first bootloader bin file for your accompanying motherboard. Since my console I'm performing this on is a Trinity, it's called trinity1bl.bin. But you might have something else such as Xenon, Zephyr, Jasper, whatever your motherboard is going to be. You're just going to want to grab these three files. We can go ahead, right click, copy them out, navigate to wherever our console backup is, and this, if you've seen my videos on setting up bad update, the first thing I recommend doing is grabbing a flash dump of your system flash. So you could just go ahead, right click, and paste these same files right here. So this should be what your folder should look like. Make sure you still have your flash dump somewhere on hand, but you're going to want that console info, the original MAC address for your console, as well as the first bootloader key. So once we have that all set up here, we can copy anything else we want to the USB drive, but I'm just going to go ahead, eject this, and we can go back over to the system. Now I plugged it back in, signed back into my profile, and I was able to come back to Aurora with ease. The nice thing is as well too with XeUnshackle is that you not only have the ability to be able to have some better game compatibility, so there's going to be less patching required there. So you don't always have to patch your default executable now, you should be able to do that less often. You should also be able to play more games on demand titles if they've been backed up in that format as well. And finally, for original Xbox games, as long as you have everything set up properly, check this out, we can go ahead, just load this in here, and it took a little bit to boot up here, but you could see that I did not have to boot into OG Xbox Prep like we have to do on FreeMyXe. It's just able to work straight away. And this is due to how the patches are handled on Xenon Unshackle as opposed to using something such as FreeMyXe. So it does automate that process a little bit more and makes it even more seamless. Like I said before, bringing this more to a JTAG or RGH standard. It's still not going to be a 100% one-to-one thing, like this is not going to be a complete replacement for having a RGH, but it certainly allows for an even better experience and brings it to a higher parity level than what we had before. So once we're done here, I just want to make sure this worked. I'm going to go ahead, exit out to Xbox Home, and get back to Aurora. Now, once we're back here, this is really up to you, and all you need to do is just play your system and have fun at this point. Play around with the better compatibility, try out some plugins if you'd like to. Just again, it's not going to be at all recommended to modify any of the files on your NAND. That's going to be a really easy way to screw up your bad update system. So just like before, I do not recommend that at all. The last recommendation I have though, as a little bit of a gotcha, gotcha is, again, just when it comes to the network compatibility on here. Now, my system, again, is currently connected to the network, but if we are going to turn off the system, you can go over to your system settings, and this is going to be more important for people on Wi-Fi. If you're using a wired internet connection, you can just unplug your Ethernet cable at any time, but if you're using a wireless internet connection, you're going to want to go to your network settings, and you're going to want to disconnect and forget your Wi-Fi network, and then turn your system off, because again, the next time you turn on your system, it's automatically going to connect to Wi-Fi, and I do not recommend connecting these bad update systems directly to Xbox Live unless you're wanting to risk a ban. Either way, that is about it for this video here. I did want to give a big shout out and thank you to Byram90 for releasing this and getting it out there, because so far it has been a pretty awesome improvement, and again, as long as you're perfectly okay with using bad updates, you can get this to a pretty close level to what you could do with a JTAG or RGH system. As I've said, can you do everything you can on a JTAG or RGH? No. But Xenon Unshackle does bring us that much closer, and the big thing has been those plugins. So again, if there's any type of real-time modding you want to try out, if there's any kind of plugins you're wanting to try out on the system here that have only been for JTAG and RGH up until this point, well, you have a little bit more of a fair shot of trying those out now. Either way, that is about it for this video here. This is Mr. Mario signing off. Thank you all for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, a like would absolutely be appreciated, and if you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too.